All right, today we are diving into the story of one of the most radical leaders in all of Roman history. This is a guy who inherited an empire that was, and I mean this literally, on the verge of total collapse. And his solution? Well, he decided the only way to save it was to break it apart. I mean, seriously, think about that question. It's not just some thought experiment. This was the reality staring down the Roman world in the late 3rd century. Imagine someone hands you the keys to a superpower that is actively tearing itself apart. Where do you even start?
So before Diocletian steps onto the scene, you just have chaos. Historians have a name for it, the crisis of the 3rd century. And honestly, that name feels like a massive understatement. For 50 years, the Roman Empire wasn't just sick, it was in a complete and total freefall. We're talking about a complete systems failure here. Think about it, dozens of emperors in just 5 decades. And most of them assassinated. The economy was an absolute wreck thanks to runaway inflation. The borders were caving in under attacks from Germanic tribes in the powerful Sasanian Empire in the east. And civil war, that wasn't an event anymore. It was just the status quo.
So let's really set the scene. This is the world Diocletian is about to walk into, a world where becoming the emperor was basically a death sentence.
The problem wasn't just bad luck. The system itself was fundamentally broken. Even really capable emperors like Aurelian and Probus, guys who had some major wins, were eventually murdered by their own soldiers. The job of emperor had become too big, too dangerous, and way too unstable for any single person to manage. And right into this chaos, into this power vacuum, steps our guy. And listen, he's not some Roman noble with a fancy family name. Nope, he's a soldier, through and through.
This is Diocletian. Well, originally his name was Diocles. He came from really humble beginnings over in what's now Croatia. His father might have been a scribe or maybe even a freed slave. He was an Illyrian, part of this new breed of tough-as-nails soldiers from the Balkan provinces who were climbing the military ladder based on pure skill, not on who their daddy was. So, his big moment arrives in the most Roman way possible, a couple of dead emperors. The Emperor Carus dies under mysterious circumstances while on campaign in Persia. Then, a few months later, his son Numerian, who's the new emperor in the east, is found dead in his tent. Suddenly, the whole eastern army is leaderless, stranded deep in enemy territory, and they are desperate for a commander.
And this moment, right here, tells you everything you need to know about Diocletian. In this moment of total crisis, he doesn't flinch. He calls the whole army together, points his finger at the Praetorian prefect, a guy named Aper, blames him for the emperor's death, and then he draws his own sword and executes him right there on the spot. It was brutal, it was decisive, and it instantly won him the undying loyalty of the legions. Just like that, he was Emperor Diocletian.
But Diocletian was smart. He knew he couldn't just repeat the mistakes of the guys who came before him. Ruling alone was suicide. So he cooked up an idea that was, for its time, completely revolutionary. He called it the Tetrarchy. And the name says it all. It literally means rule by 4. This wasn't just a small tweak. It was a radical redesign of what it even meant to be a Roman emperor. Diocletian's diagnosis was actually pretty simple. The empire wasn't just a job for one man. It was a job for 4. See, he realized the problem wasn't a lack of good emperors. The problem was an impossible job description. So what do? You split the workload. And to make sure everybody bought into this new system, he came up with a brilliant divine marketing campaign. He took on the title Iovius, named after Jupiter, the king of the gods. He was the big picture guy, the master strategist. His co-emperor, a man named Maximian, was called Herculeus, after Hercules, the demigod hero who got things done. It was genius. It set up a clear hierarchy. Diocletian was the CEO, Maximian was the COO. And you can see how this worked in the real world. The empire was basically carved up into 4 zones of influence. Now, this wasn't a formal split, not yet. It was more like a practical division of labor. Each ruler got their own court, their own army, and their own piece of the border to worry about. The whole structure was kind of like a corporate succession plan. You had 2 senior emperors, the Augusti, that was Diocletian in the east and Maximian in the west, and then you had 2 junior emperors, the Caesars, Galerius and Constantius, who reported to them. The idea was beautiful in its simplicity. When the 2 senior guys retired, the 2 junior guys would move up, and they'd appoint 2 new juniors. No more assassinations, no more civil wars, just a stable, predictable transfer of power. So that was the theory. A brilliant, logical system built for stability. But the big question is, did it actually work?
Well, the war with Persia gives us a perfect test case. The junior emperor, Darius, suffers this massive, humiliating defeat. Now, in the old days, that could have sparked a civil war. But instead, Diocletian, the senior partner, holds him accountable. He publicly shames Darius, making him walk in front of his imperial carriage, and then he gives him a new army. Darius, desperate to get his honor back, launches this incredible counterattack and wins a crushing victory. It worked. The system allowed for failure, for accountability, and then for recovery.
And with this new stability, Diocletian could finally get to work on other things. He totally overhauled the tax system, he reorganized the provinces, and he built up the frontier defenses. Now, not everything he did was a success. His attempt to fix inflation by just setting maximum prices for everything, yeah, that was a complete economic disaster. But on the whole, he brought order back from the brink of chaos.
But, for all its brilliant logic, the Tetrarchy had a very human and, as it turns out, a fatal flaw. At the end of the day, this system's biggest strength was also its greatest weakness. It was built on the idea of merit over bloodline, that you should pick the best man for the job, not just your son. But that idea went against 1,000 years of Roman tradition. Guys like Constantine and Maxentius, the sons of the emperors, they weren't just going to step aside quietly. The system was only as strong as the one man holding it all together.
Which brings us to Diocletian's final and maybe most unbelievable act. After 20 years of single-handedly rebuilding the Roman world, he did something no emperor had ever done before. I mean, his impact was just immense. He stopped the 50-year crisis cold. He totally reinvented the government and secured the frontiers. His reforms arguably gave the empire another century and a half of life. And after accomplishing all of that, after saving the world, he did the unthinkable. On May 1st, 305 CE, he quit. He just gave up all his power, voluntarily. He was the first Roman emperor ever to do that. He retired to this enormous palace he'd built back in his homeland, and famously spent his last years tending to his vegetable gardens. But his real legacy was so much bigger than that. In dividing the empire's management, he also laid the foundation for its permanent split into East and West. And that really leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Was Diocletian the man who saved Rome? The guy whose wild ideas gave it a new lease on life? Or was he the man who, in trying to hold one empire together, accidentally created two and set the stage for the final collapse of the West? It's a paradox, and it's one that we're still wrestling with today.